now we're on to section B, the theory section, and slightly harder than section A. So we've done section A first. We're feeling nice and relaxed because all we were doing were drawing label diagrams, some nice graphs, so it wasn't too hard. But we've lost all our nerves now. We're nice and relaxed, and we're ready now to get stuck in to the next part. So the theory section, 280 marks altogether. You've got to do 5 out of 8 questions. Each question is 56 marks. 5 by 56 gives me 280 marks. Okay, before I start breaking down the paper, showing you what questions you might think of doing and what you might leave out, let me talk about once again, how do I study for section B? A little bit harder than how do I study for section A. So how do I study for section B? Well, I always say this, section B is made up of the mundane, that's the boring stuff that I have to learn, and the intelligent, that's the nice stuff where I've got my calculator out, I'm doing all these lovely nuclear energy problems and so on. I prefer the intelligent, and you probably do as well. But, you know, if you want to get your H1, well, you've got to do the mundane. When you get to college, it's going to be more about the intelligent than the mundane, but it's probably about a 50-50 split. So what do I need to do for the mundane? Well, I've got to learn my definitions. Learn my definition in words, but if possible, we could also use a formula. So for example, they might say define electric field strength. Well, you can write that down as a formula. That formula is E is equal to F divided by Q. And that will give you half the marks for your definition. The other half comes from what's called the notation. The notation is, what does everything stand for? What does E stand for? What does F stand for? What does Q stand for? You've got to fill that in. E is electric field intensity, measured in newtons per coulomb. F is force measured in newtons. Q is quantity of charge measured in coulombs. So you can put your definition in words, or if there's a formula that you can use, then use that formula. I'd always use the formula because I can copy that out of my table book. So if I go to my notes, for example, and I go to my table book, well, I'm on page 62, 61, and there's the formula for E is equal to F over Q. All the formulae that are required for the Leaving Cert, I would shade them in. I know you can't bring your table book into the exam with you, but at least when you're using it, you'll know exactly where the formulae are in your table book, because you'll probably only need about 10% of your table book overall. So color in all the formulae you need. What about the notation? Well, there's an alphabetical listing at the end of the table book telling you what all the letters mean. For example, there you have lots of E's, but one of them is electric field strength, E, and it gives me the units as well. So your table book is a rich resource of all of these things. I've put them all into a summary for you. There's a very nice summary for each of the sections. Here's the light and sound summary in book 1. And I've laid out all the definitions for you. And even better, I put a little asterisk beside the ones that you can actually take the formula and write down the formula with its notation. So make sure that you know your definitions very, very well. There's quite a lot of them there, but lots of them have stars with them. Anything that don't have stars, well, you just have to do the hard work of learning them. The next thing I need to know are formulae. Well, you don't have to know them because they're in the table book. But again, color them in, know where they are. They're all, definitions are in your notes like that. Formulae are in your notes in boxes like that. And I also write down the page number of the table book, in the table book where the formula is. Color all them in so you know approximately your way around the table book. By the time you get to the Leaving Cert exam, your table book should be in tatters. I hate seeing students with lovely looking table books when it comes to June, simply because they haven't used them. Your table book is your friend. I would say that 20% of the marks could actually be obtained by using your table book correctly. So always have your table book there and use it very, very well. So formulae, no big deal. They're in your table book. Just know where they are. What's the next thing I've got to do as part of the mundane? Well, I've got to do demonstration experiments. These are different to the Section A experiments. The Section A experiments are mandatory experiments that you do in the lab. These experiments are just how do you demonstrate the Doppler effect? How do you demonstrate anything on the course? So they're in your notes with boxes like that have curved corners. Now, anytime you get a demo experiment, they're a right pain to learn, but you should set it out in this way every single time. Apparatus with a simple diagram. Method, no need to write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just a couple of short sentences will do. Observation, and sometimes a conclusion. They usually give 3 marks for each of those parts if they're required. So I've got to learn my demo experiments. The demo experiments are in the summary and they're in your notes. Let's see where they are in the summary by going back to your notes. So here's all the formulae that we were talking about. So I even, for the formula, I even put in a little diagram to help you visualize the formula and where it might be used. And I also give the page number of the table book. So now we get down to demos. So here's a very simple demonstration of reflection. Diagram, apparatus, method, observation. So you've got to make your way through your demonstrations. They're a right pain. There's lots of them there. They go on. Some of them are quite important. For example, Young's experiment is quite an important one. But that is probably the hardest work that you have to do, all that kind of mundane work. What else do I have to do as part of the mundane? Well, proofs. You've got to do proofs. They're in your notes as boxes with double lines in them. There's not many of them around, but you've got to do them because if they do ask it as part of a question, it's usually worth quite a high number of marks. So your proofs are in there. If I go to my notes again, here's the proof. There's only one proof, by the way, for light and sound, to prove n lambda is equal to d sine theta. So you just make sure you have a nice diagram and do your couple of lines of proof. Then, finally, as part of the mundane, I've got what's called STS, Science, Technology and Society, or real life physics. Now, these are all over the course, and they're in little boxes, broken line boxes like that in your notes. And all I want you to do when you study these real life applications is just read them a number of times. You don't have to learn them like you have to learn the demo experiments. Just read a number of times. So in the summary, I've just taken out the most important parts of them right there, and polarization, applications of refraction, and so on. Because all they really ask for sometimes is a one-line answer. Give an application of the Doppler effect, for example, and you would say speed traps or something like that. So it's very, very simple. So how do I use the notes? Well, I've told you about the definitions. They're in boxes like we see at the top of the page. There's my formulae. There's my demonstration examples with the method and the observation. There's my proofs. Here's a list, by the way, of all the proofs that you need for the Leaving Cert. So most of the proofs are actually on mechanics. There's 3 on electricity and 1 on light and sound. But if it's a topic that you're covering and not leaving out, make sure you have the proofs done really well. And here's a real life application about soap bubbles and petrol films, which involves colors produced by interference. So that's how you do the mundane. The mundane is a right pain. I know it's a pain, and you have to invest time in it. But you know, the best thing I can do for you is give you nice notes where I've organized all the material. I put all the definitions and demo experiments in your summary. So I've tried to make it as easy as I can for you to study. You still have to do it yourself, of course. So how do I study for Section B? We've talked about the mundane. It's a right pain, but you have to do it. Some students say, I'm above all that. I want to do all the intelligence stuff with my calculator, but if you want to get your H1, you have to do it. Then the intelligent. Well, this is far more interesting. This is about using your calculator and doing nice problems and questions. There's 3 steps to actually getting this right. The first step is, in my notes, I've got worked examples, which are very well chosen. I've chosen every type of question you could be asked on the Leaving Cert. The first thing is, and I do all of these in the videos, is to go through the worked examples with me, fill them in, and know them inside out. Now you know all your techniques. But then you need to do the numerical problems at the end of each chapter, at the end of each lesson. There are numerical problems because you have to practice yourself. So there's a great selection of questions with nice little twists and turns. You work your way through them as well. You've got all the answers. You've got all the solutions, by the way, to all of these in your book. The book you can access digitally on the platform, or you can actually buy the book. And step 3 then, you go off and do some Leaving Cert questions yourself and just test yourself out, because that'll give you great confidence. So that's how I study for section B. I got to do the mundane, and then the intelligent is my calculator and doing all the problems. So if I look at my notes again, here's a section of my notes, and there's the examples I'm talking about. You make sure they're all filled in and you know how to do them. And then when you're finished, you have a nice selection of numerical problems that you can do. And then you can go on and do some Leaving Cert questions.